Welcome back. In this video, we are focused on user-defined functions. Every so often you write a program and there's certain functions you want to use over and over again. Well, one option is to copy the code every time you use it. That gets cumbersome because why would you want to take a piece of code and copy it all the time if you don't have to? The bigger problem is if you eventually want to improve that piece of code, or if you find a defect in it and you want to fix it, you have to remember all the places you use it and you go change it, okay? A way around that problem is by us to create a function, put all of that piece of code that we have in a function, and then every time we want to use it, we just basically access that function and use it. That once allows us to write the code one time and use it as many times as we want. And the other thing is, if there is ever a problem or we want to improve that piece of code, there's only one place we have to go to modify the code to accomplish that, which is quite advantageous when it comes to programming, and we use it all the time. So user-defined functions are very, very useful. The general form basically is you use the keyword define, and then you come up with a name for your function, and then you can pass it any arguments run, or if you decide you can leave it blank if you don't have any arguments to pass to it. And then you write whatever piece of code you want to write that you want to keep reusing. And then and again, this return function is optional. If you want this function to return a value, then you can put that value in this return function, and it gets back to the calling statement. Otherwise, you just leave that one behind. So the best way to understand this is actually look at a piece of code that uses the user-defined function. It all becomes relatively clear. So let's go ahead and jump in. I have a program at how useful it is questionable, but it's very useful in demonstrating the use of user functions. So I kind of wrote this little program to show you how user-defined functions are created. So I don't know, but I used one of the modules, maybe a practice. In previous videos, we've talked about modules. If the built-in functions in Python are not good enough, you can always add modules that give you more and more functionality to use. I have this time function I included just for this purpose. Okay, now I'm going to try to do a very simple user-defined function. So one thing you got to do, if you're going to define a function, user-defined function, you got to do that first before you use it. So it's got to be earlier in the code before you use it. Since this is not a compiled language, that's the requirement. So in here I put this is one of my functions, a very, very simple function, has no input, has no output. All it does a little bit of function for me that I don't want to have to write all the time. All it does is when I call this function, it writes the time of day. That's all it does. And here is what I'm using it. I'm calling time of day. And notice I defined it up here, and I'm using it down here. And notice I basically have defined, it's a keyword which says I'm going to define a user-defined function. Here is its name, and here is just saying that I don't pass any parameter to you. And here indented in is all the code. I could have many lines of code. I just chose not to put a lot of lines of code, but you can have as many as you need to get the job done. So that's, now you might ask, okay, what if I want to I want to accept functions and I want to return functions. So I wrote this little user-defined function here where it accepts two parameters. You can have as many as you want, but in this case, it gets one variable called str, another variable called n, same format, defined, the keyword. The name of the function is str repeat, and then all it does is basically whatever string you give him, it repeats it n times, and that's all it does. So basically I say, okay, for I in the range of 0 to n, how many times? And every time it prints the string, so that's how many. Oh, maybe just wanted to have more code in there. Also, so okay, tell me the length of the total number of characters you printed. So if each character has 20 characters and you printed it 3 times, I expect to see a 60 printed. And it also actually, it doesn't print it, it returns the value. So when you call this function, it does a couple of things. It prints the strings so many times, and also it returns a value. Notice this one didn't have a return. It didn't have any parameter. This one has a parameter as an input and a return a value. Pretty cool. So now I'm going to use this function. I use a time of day at the beginning. So I write down what time of day it is here. And then at the end, I write time of day. And the format I chose to use is going to be minute, hour, colon, minutes. And that's how it's going to come. It's a 24-hour time. So I don't have to put PM or AM on it. Okay. And then comes in and prints the characters that I input, however many time I tell him to input. And then once it's finished printing that, then it tells me how many number of characters there, which came from, total number of characters came from the return value total. And then it prints the number of characters. It says that's how many characters I printed, and then it prints the time of day, and then it's done. And notice in this time I used the time of day twice, but the code was written once. I could use this string repeat as many times as I want, and it would work fine. Okay, then that's basically, in a nutshell, that is user-defined function. Pretty straightforward. A couple of one keyword to remember and some indentation to remember, and you're off to the races. The code you write is very much the code you would have written anyway. So let's go ahead and run this thing just to see if it actually runs. So we'll do a F5, which runs the code. Yeah, go ahead and save it. I didn't think I changed anything, but maybe I did. So the code comes up, and as you can see, it prints the time of day is time is 15:03:07, 3 o'clock, 3 in the afternoon, 06 p.m. Perfect. And it says what is enter the string you want to print. As this is an example of user-defined function. Great. So I have that. That's the character. That's the string I want to print. And then it asks me how many times you want to print it. I say, okay, why don't we print it 3 times? So, okay, 3 times it printed. You see, it says the time of day was 15:07, and I'm 15:06 when I started. And then I got the strings, I printed the string, and then I said the total characters. So if you count all the characters in each one time multiplied by 3, you get 129 character. And when you finish, the time was 15:07. So it took a minute for me to input and it to do its job. And that's basically a summary of how you actually write a user-defined function and how you use it. So that's, and again, back to here, this is the format for it. And to use it, you just use the name and the arguments you need to pass. And there you go. Well, that brings us to the end of this video.